Okay, I'm back again. 1946 saw the release of Lowly City, an Indian film in the Hindi language. Lowly City is our next adaptation of Maxim Gorky's play The Lower Depths. We previously discussed Kurosawa's 1958 film, and so now let's go back in time to director Chetan Anand's 1946 work. This is actually a very significant film in the history of world cinema. Lowly City, translated from Nicha Nagar, is considered to have been a pioneering act of social realism in Indian cinema, setting a pivotal precedent for what is referred to as parallel cinema. Parallel cinema was an evocative response to the Italian neo-realist movement and introduced the likes of Satyajit Ray, Ritwik Ghatak, and Mrinal Sen to the film world. Lowly City itself was released the year after Rossellini's Rome Open City. Parallel cinema is recognized for its efforts at depicting realism, for containing a certain socio-political seriousness, and for moving away from the musical fusion formula which had been a staple of mainstream Indian cinema. Actually, Lowly City was co-written by one Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, who went on to both write and direct many acclaimed films of the parallel cinema bracket. The other credited writer is Hayatullah Ansari, who was a noted short story writer. Lowly City was the first Indian film to have gained recognition at the Cannes Film Festival, and given that this was the 1946 festival, was one of 11 films of the 18 entered feature films to have earned, apparently tied for, the Best Film Award, called the Grand Prix du Festival International du Film at that time. That year, Rome Open City was one of the other films nominated and winners. To this day, it technically remains the only Indian film to have won a Palme d'Or. This film's other major point of significance historically and artistically as an exceptional strength was that it was the first film to feature Ravi Shankar as its musical director. One of the greatest musicians and recording artists of the 20th century, few composers can send me to heaven as quickly as Ravi Shankar. Now, it is worth mentioning that it seems as though, based upon my imperfect research, that this film's storyline was more inspired by Gorky's The Lower Depths as opposed to being an outright adaptation. There are notable differences in the storylines, although artistically it would be accurate to say that Lowly City is still, in a sense, a version of The Lower Depths. Its most distinct similarities are the setting, tone, scenario, and certain cast and plot beats, although to distinguish itself, Lowly City appears to de-emphasize humor, contains more optimism, however, is much more undeniably socially conscious, and I'll get to that in a minute, and has a bittersweet rather than nihilistic ending. It believes in hope, which is not something that could necessarily be said about the play, or the Kurosawa film especially. Stylistically, this film is quite different from Kurosawa's The Lower Depths. Kurosawa sought to prove cinema's superiority at conveying the strengths of a stage play, although Chetan Anand directed something more overtly, purely in a cinematic tradition. Its brazen social realism recalls the Soviet Union's early pioneers, as does its occasional dabbling in considered montage. Actually, Lowly City, unlike the Kurosawa film, is set in its contemporary surroundings rather than opting for a period piece. Its creators believed in the relevance of Gorky's story toward their socio-political surroundings and desired to conjure its prowess by enacting it, recording it, amongst these very surroundings. And yes, it must be mentioned, and anyone who has seen the film would, that Lowly City occasionally employs some playful expressionistic touches. Whilst an act of social realism, there is a certain deliberated dynamic at play when illustrating the differences between the poor and the rich. The way the villainous landlord is portrayed reminds one of something out of Metropolis. Although, to be fair, Lowly City doesn't have to work very hard to demonstrate this landlord's evil. Even without using a cheeky montage to compare his mug to that of his gargoyles, the man's choices and actions are utterly despicable. But some might suggest it wouldn't be of the socialist realist tradition if it didn't engage in a little bit of in-group, out-group demonization based upon wealth disparities. All I can say is that I find it very cinematically creative. I'm wholly impressed. I think that Lowly City is a terrific film. In some respects, I actually prefer this film to Kurosawa's. The main reason I would feel that way is because Lowly City is more rooted in uniquely cinematic traditions, whereas Kurosawa's The Lower Depths might be a very deliberate act, or may as well have been an act of, cinematic supremacy in lieu of performing or recording traditional theatre productions. It is still imprisoned by it being a theatre production. Yes, cinema is better theatre than theatre, the lower depths just went ahead and proved that casually. Akira Kurosawa went ahead and did that in 1958. But it is still a superior art form, period, to theatre, to the point where it is capable of abandoning its roots in theatre entirely, even when it is inspired by it narratively and or thematically in the case of Lowly City. So yes, lovely little film, very highly recommended. India is one of the most interesting countries on the cinematic globe.